So where are my Halloween people? Who loves Halloween? Anybody? Raise your hands. I know who some of you guys are. Okay. Oh, do you guys too? Oh, all right. Yeah. So, you remember growing up? Do you remember the houses that gave away the best candy? Yeah. Did you always make sure we're going to the houses that give the good candy away, right? Did you know the difference between the houses that give you the fun-size candy bars and the ones that give you the full-size candy bars, right? You go to the rich neighborhoods and you can find the full-size candy, but it wasn't always the rich neighborhoods, right? Some of those, you ran into those houses in your neighborhood that were just so generous and they love to give. So I just love those houses that give full-size candy bars out. We're continuing our series today on stewardship. And we're not going to talk about candy bars. I'm not going to give you any candy bars, sorry. Not even fun size. But we're going to talk about stewardship. And today we are talking about the financial aspect of stewardship. And remember, we've defined these last couple weeks as the responsible management of resources, gifts, blessings that have been entrusted to us by God. And it's our time, it's our talents, it's our treasure, and it's the creation of the earth. And we've said over these last couple weeks that stewardship is an act of worship. And next week we're gonna participate in this act of worship in the service by bringing our commitment cards. Hopefully everyone has gotten an envelope like this mailed to your house. And if you haven't, some of the hospitality team at all the entrances and exits have copies of this. So if you'd like to take this, it's a little introductory letter from me and a commitment card. And you can pick one of those up on your way out if you did not receive one. By the way, if you didn't receive one and you've been with us before, it means we don't have your address. So you may want to let us know where you live just in case we need to send you something. But we're going to bring those back next week as an act of worship during the service. We're going to come forward and we're going to place those together, and we're going to pray for these gifts and these commitments and pray and lift them up to the Lord. That the Lord would use those to guide our mission, to guide our direction of our church in the next coming year. So remember, it's an act of worship. Stewardship is also a spiritual discipline that we practice day in and day out. Not just our finances, but our time, the skill sets that we have. It's how we care for one another, how we care for the world. And I think most importantly, stewardship helps us to stay on mission, to focus on what is the most important thing in our church's life, but also in our own personal life. Because many times, how we steward our lives demonstrates what things are important to us. Because we need to remember that all we have and all that we are is a gift from God. And God's grace abounds. Amen? God's grace abounds for everyone and everything and every organization. But as we learn in our text today, there is inequity happening. And specifically, Paul is gathering the churches that he has helped to start or he has helped to nurture on as one of the saints. And some are doing really well, and some are struggling. And specifically, the church that started it all in Jerusalem is in the middle of experiencing a famine. And Paul is organizing this collection from around the Roman Empire to send money back to help those in Jerusalem. Because what's happening in Jerusalem, they're not able to even find food for themselves, but they're also not able then to help those who are in more need than others. And the church in Jerusalem, the one who sent out Paul and Peter and Philip and all of the disciples to take the gospel message to the known world, are now there and they're in need and they need help. And this collection was a way to help the poor in Jerusalem who were suffering in this famine. It was intended also to be a way to break down barriers between the Jewish churches and the Gentile churches. So as they went out, the disciples experienced some people were Jews who had been spread out when the destruction of the temple came, and Jews were expelled from Israel. They spread out all over the known world, and we have this diversity and difference arising between Jewish churches and Gentile churches. Those who are filled with people who are by blood and family relations Jewish, and those who are not, those who are Greek or other ethnicities. And so this is a way to build unity, because we're all collecting to help one group. We're all together working hard to help another place. It's a show of Christian unity in the church. And the collection involved churches from Galatia and Philippi and Corinth and Macedonia and Achaia. And the target of this letter, the audience of this letter, is the Corinthian church. It's a church that Paul helped to start. And after then he left, they've been wandering a little bit. They've been wavering a little bit. And they in Corinth don't quite seem ready to act on this collection. They say they're willing, but they've not been doing what Paul told them to do to prepare for this collection. He had asked them to prepare and collect this money weekly, to set aside for when those who are going to Jerusalem to take the money. But they haven't been doing. They've been saying we're willing, but they haven't acted yet. And Paul is concerned. He's concerned about what they're doing. He's concerned about the church's reputation. He's concerned about what do all those people around them who are not believers in Jesus, what are they saying about the church? Isn't one of their tenets of their faith is to care for the poor and to care for one another, that they would be known, they would know them by their love? And yet the church in Corinth seems to be holding back. And Paul is concerned about their reputation, and Paul is concerned about his reputation too. In verse 8 of chapter 8, Paul says, I'm not giving you an order, but by mentioning the commitment of others, he was sharing the example of the Macedonian church, which was a church in a much less affluent area than Corinth. Corinth was a big bustling city, and the church in Macedonia was a rural church, a smaller church, made up of a different kind of congregation. But he was upholding the Macedonian church as an example for the Corinth church to look at. They were giving way beyond their means. And even to worrying Paul, are you giving too much? Has that ever been a problem with anybody's church? I've never experienced that, where a church is giving too much, right? Anybody ever have that experience? No. But Paul is worried about the church in Macedonia, because they were giving too much, but he's also holding it up as this example. And he's showing to the Corinthians, this is how you should be. So I'm not giving you an order, he said, but by mentioning the commitment of others, I'm trying to prove the authenticity of your love also. Because you've been doing all the same things. You've been doing all the right things so far. And you just need to bring your focus back in and look to what the Macedonians are doing and follow their example. You see, the church in Corinth is given the same grace for transformation, but they've not been fully embracing it. Just like we are given the full and the same grace for transformation that even the church in Macedonia and the church in Corinth are given. We are given that same thing still, 2,000 years later. And the Corinthian church has been given this, but they're not fully embracing this transformation. And it shows by how they've been treating Paul. When Paul left, some other people that Paul later calls super apostles. That's quite an image, right? Can you just imagine, I imagine apostles dressed in first century garb with capes, around them. He calls them super apostles. They came in after him and said, I'm not so sure about what Paul is teaching you. And they were much more eloquent in their speech. They were much more polished speakers. They required a financial gift, a financial offering to teach in the synagogues and in the churches in Corinth, where Paul was he was a tent maker. He took care of his own salary, and he didn't ask for a salary. He wanted the money to be given to other people. So Paul supported himself. And the people in Corinth thought, well, Paul, if he is not asking us to pay him for this message, he must not be very professional. He must not be as good as these super apostles. So they've not been treating Paul well, who really gave his all to get this church started and risk his life even going and traveling around the Roman Empire. So it shows that the Corinthian church has not fully embraced this transformational experience in Jesus by how they've been treating Paul, and they've not been giving up to their ability. They've been giving, perhaps, but it's been reluctantly, and it's been out of obligation. Has anybody ever given at times reluctantly and out of obligation? I have. Yeah. But money is not the only issue that demonstrates our transformation, but it is a very significant one. I think especially for us as Americans. We tend to have a different relationship with money in the West, I think. And so how we give is not just the only demonstration of our transformational experience with Jesus, but it is a very significant one. Not sharing the fullness of God's grace with others. And Paul is saying, there's some churches that are way ahead of you in this. And they're much younger. And you should be much further along. And so he asked them to ponder in their hearts what God has done for them and to see what they might give. In our own world, we can see some of these same situations that we see in Corinth. Inequity abounds in our world too, right? Some have a great deal, and some have next to nothing at all. There is immense suffering in our world. We can just drive around our community, and we can see the great inequity. We can drive around here in the Lellman community, and we see newer 4-bedroom, 2 baths, large homes, well taken care of, and then you can drive by homes that we wonder how anyone can even live there, and can anyone live there? And then, not to mention, driving around our community now following 2 hurricanes and the damage that has done. Like the Corinthians, our world sometimes can be drawn toward the ideas of bigger and better and faster. We can tend to gravitate toward the idea of new, shiny ideas. We tend to appreciate big events with big crowds because it demonstrates success. And sometimes we overlook the smaller things going on in our world, or the things that might not get as much attention. Often we will hear the voices of whoever is the loudest out there and what they say. And that's where we have this paradox of the cross. Jesus was gloriously exalted through his suffering and death on the cross. And the cross reveals God's salvation for us, that Jesus died for our sin, and it reveals God's character of being a self-giving lover of all humanity. And the cross also demonstrates a new way of life for us, that we would imitate Jesus and that we would imitate our Jesus' death on the cross in our own lives, that we would die to self and take up our cross in the world. The cross and Jesus represent a life of humility, a life of suffering, a life of poverty, a life of selfless giving. It doesn't mean that we have to embrace suffering, and it doesn't mean that we have to experience and put ourselves into poverty. What it means, though, is we need to keep that in our minds and our hearts. That we would be willing to be in poverty in order to lift other people up. It's a life of the selfless giving of all of ourselves. And with all these troubles, the troubles in the scriptures in Corinth and in the Roman Empire, the troubles in our current world that mirror a lot of that, glory to God, because we find grace in these scriptures too. Paul says that be the best in this work of grace in the same way that you are at the best of everything. He's telling the Corinthians. He says you're so good in your faith, in your speech, in your knowledge, in your total commitment and love that we have inspired you to. He says, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. He said, although he was rich, he became poor for your sakes, so that you could become rich through his poverty. Jesus, sitting at the right hand of God the Father, decided to come down from his holy throne and to come and live a life like us on earth. The life of a peasant boy, a Jewish boy learning the Jewish faith, learning a trade of being a tekton or a carpenter, a builder from his father. He came and just lived a normal life to experience life just like we do. He gave up his rich seat at the right hand of God to become like us, so that we would be rich in his poverty. Paul goes on to say in verse 6 of chapter 9, what I mean is this: the one who sows a small number of seeds will also reap a small crop. And the one who sows a generous amount of seeds will reap a generous crop. In other words, God's grace abounds. God's grace, friends, is like the house that gives the full-size candy bars. And in my case, Jesus would give us a Reese's peanut butter cup with not the 2 in it, but the 4, right? You know? That's the one I'm looking for. He would give out Snickers and not Milky Ways or Three Musketeers. No, apologies to those of you who like Milky Ways and Three Musketeers. But the fullness of God's grace is full-sized, not fun-sized. And it is through this fullness, this experience in the fullness of Christ and the fullness of God's grace in our lives that where we then give as an act of trust. We trust that God, what God did for us in the giving of Jesus 2,000 years ago, he will do again and again and again for us in the future. So giving is an act of trust that we put in God. And giving also thus reflects God's image in the world, because Jesus was a giver. Some of you know that I teach a world religions course at St. Pete College. And this week we're finally gathering together after some disruption from the hurricanes, and this next 2 weeks we've been spending on Christianity. We've talked through all the religions of India, we've talked through all the religions of East Asia, and now we've come to the Middle East, where we talked about Zoroastrianism, the three magi, and we also talked about Judaism, and now this week we're talking about Christianity. And Thursday in class, I was briefly trying to give the story of Christianity, and I told them that Jesus was going around and teaching, and the Pharisees had some problems with that, and they were stirring up trouble, trying to catch him in some untrue teachings. And they created some dissonance there. And so ultimately, they gathered the Romans. He was arrested and tried in a mocking type of trial and was sentenced to death and died on a cross. And one of the students in my class, she says, "What did Jesus do to those people who executed him?" And I thought for a moment. I said, well, what would be your response? If you were the all-powerful God and someone executed you without reason, without purpose. And I said, if that was me, the broken me, I would have been like, I am figuring out how, as I'm on that cross, I'm figuring out how do I smite these people out here, right? How do maybe I invoke an earthquake or a hurricane or something to get rid of them? And I told this student, though, but what happened is on the cross, Jesus speaks out to his enemies, speaks out to his executioners and says, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." And there, from that student in the second row, there was an audible gasp. Really? We have a friend whose name is John Peter, and he lives in India. He has a ministry in India. And Tracy and I have both traveled to be with him many years ago. And when we traveled there, every village we went to, whether it was in the heart of the city of Bangalore, which is kind of their tech capital of India. Probably if you're doing tech support, you'll probably end up talking to somebody in Bangalore. And every place we went, whether it was there in Bangalore or was in a rural setting, the most rural of rural areas, every place we went, we were greeted with this incredible amount of hospitality. There were leis of flowers given to us at each stop. There were gifts. There were drinks of sodas, or in some of the rural areas, there would be a gentleman who scampered up a palm tree with a machete, got us some coconuts, and prepared them with straws and opened them for us to drink the coconut water in there. They would give the women flowers to take with them. And John Peter, in those first couple stops, he was quietly reminding and telling people in our group, they didn't eat yesterday, so they could do this for you. And every place we went, they were always there waiting for us. And John Peter would tell you himself, there's a thing called Indian people time. And they don't start things until everybody is there. And every place we gathered, they were waiting for us. And many times they have been waiting there for hours. Not eating the day before to prepare these gifts and waiting for us to come. Tracy and I have not always been in the place we are now, and our kids are now out of the house. But we have 4 kids, and there's times when we struggled. I've told you I've made some unwise financial decisions in my early life. We paid a lot of stupid tax, and buying cars and doing things that we shouldn't have done, and during that we struggled with giving. We struggled at times when we gave nothing at all to the church, and we were kind of reconciling out, well, we serve a lot. We were doing all these things within the church, and it's okay if we don't give because we serve a lot. And that's great. That's wonderful. But we're also called to give. And over time, we began to be able to give a little bit more and more. We started out from, maybe like, let's give 1% of what we have. And over time, we built that up. We took a step of faith each year, and we eventually got to 10% and over 10%, and it became a joyful thing for us. Before that, when we were struggling, we were gripping that steering wheel with all we had. Lord, okay, we're given with what we can, but we wanted to give so much more because it gives us great joy to give. And eventually we're able to do that. And hopefully when the kids are out of college, we'll be able to do even more. So I just want to encourage you that no matter where you are in that journey, your faith journey, but also your financial well-being, we're all in different places. I just want to encourage you to give and to be purposeful in how you give from that standpoint. And there are seasons in our faith. There are seasons when we might have to take a break, and there are seasons when we can give more. And some of them are years long. So this stewardship series is not to put pressure on you. It's not to guilt you into giving. It's to get to hopefully introduce you to the joy of giving when you are more able. We took some risks at times, and times we knew we had some expenses, or we gave more or took a risk and gave more than we had given the month before, and it turned out okay. We survived. Currently, just to let you know, because there's all kinds of different teaching out there. The tithe is 10%. There's debate if that is applicable to the Jews and not applicable to us. Take that for what you want. I don't know that the 10% is any magical number, okay? Tracy and I do is we give off of our take-home pay after taxes and after any kind of other, Social Security and Medicare and all that kind of comes out. We give 10% or more based on that number. So I just want to encourage you to take whatever way you're going to do it, but be intentional, be purposeful, be prayerful in how you approach that. You all may have met my friend Ahmad. Ahmad is known in St. Petersburg or the Tampa Bay area as the Shawarma King. Anybody know the Shawarma King food truck? He used to come out here with us a little bit, but for the last 5 weeks, Ahmed has been down in Gulfport, giving away free meals for those affected by the hurricanes through World Central Kitchen. It's a worldwide organization that goes into areas that are experiencing disruption and feeds people. Ahmed is a Palestinian Muslim, and he's out there doing kingdom work to draw people into the love of God. He's out there giving of himself. Sort of like the Jewish church and the Gentile church, that Muslims and Hindus and whatever religion we might be, we can come to, or no religion at all, we can come together and we can all do kingdom work and build unity. I mean, isn't it sort of sad that it takes a hurricane, or it takes a natural disaster, or it takes a national tragedy like 9/11 to bring us together in unity? But oh boy, when we get that, we can do amazing things. We've seen some amazing work by people coming together in the last month or two. And we're all doing our parts to do kingdom work, to lift up Christ's reputation. And Clearview is no different. Clearview's reputation of being a beacon of hope in the community is growing here as we focus on alleviating poverty in our community and feeding the hungry and assisting those who are experiencing food scarcity through our free community dinners and our free little pantries. the Adopt-A-Bach program that meets on Saturday mornings in our field or in our fellowship hall through the Florida Dream Center. This is all working together to help people in our community. You know, this passage from Paul's letter, I don't think it's really about money. It's about the status of our heart. It's about the transformation that has happened or has not happened by the gospel in our hearts. The Corinthians were not quite ready. They ended up getting ready. They took part in the collection and gave well. So as we approach this next week and we prepare our pledges, we prepare our commitments for the coming year, I just want to encourage you to be thankful, to be proud and bragging not about yourselves, not even about our church, but bragging about God's grace for you and for everyone. And to be an example. With what we do and what we say, without knowing it, we are showing people who Jesus is in either a positive way or a negative way. So be an example of the Jesus you want people to encounter. I think our mission statement says it all: living an embodied faith, sharing God's love for all. This embodied faith includes even our wallets and our purses and our checkbooks. Some of the most difficult places for me to share my faith, I think, at times. Because I'm sometimes stingy. Sometimes worried about the future. But this embodied faith goes into our wallets and our purses and our checkbooks. It goes into our calendar and how we spend our time and how we share our skills and talents. I once had a friend who he proudly would let us know that he waited to do all his Christmas shopping until Christmas Eve. I think he might have been thinking about it before then, maybe what he wanted to get, but he didn't go till Christmas Eve. And we all know that not everything is left in the stores on Christmas Eve, right? So I think Paul is also encouraging the Corinthians by telling them to gather weekly the collection and prepare it. He wants them to prepare this gift in advance, to prepare it thoughtfully. My friend was a very thoughtful person, and I don't know why he waited till Christmas Eve. I think he did it once, and it sort of became his thing and his kind of his badge of honor, I guess. I don't know what his wife and his kids thought about it. If his wife got a gift from CVS or Walgreens, I'm not sure. But I would encourage us not to wait till Christmas Eve to decide how we might be giving to the church this next year. Do some planning. Do some prayerful questioning. And give as your heart decides. Give as your heart leads. There's no pressure. This is between you and God. And most especially that we could give willingly and cheerfully, proudly, and contentedly. Because abundant grace will flow in and through you when you do that. Because God's grace abounds. Amen.